Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world. We're delighted to have you here for the first of RedTech International's Global Online Content Series. Just to give you some background on RedTech International, our mission is to inform and connect the global community of broadcasting and audio professionals wherever they are. It's inform, connect, and exchange. Exchange useful insights on strategy, on technology that helps support our success as an industry and our sustainability. Now, when we started developing the Global Online Content Series, it's a little bit of a push for us because we tend to focus on strategy and tech as RedTech. But what became obvious to us when we were speaking to this huge database of content managers and programmers around the world is that there is a need, despite the fact that there are resources like never before, dozens, if not hundreds of sites available. There are some areas that the content managers we were speaking to, they said to us, we feel a little undercooked. We don't think this is as well covered as it should be. So we asked them, what do you want to talk about? What are the things you feel you'd want to tune in for, that you really want to learn more about? And that's how Global Online Content Series was born. Now, you still have an important responsibility. Apart from telling us the sorts of things that you were interested in learning about, your responsibility today, as you watch wherever you are in the world, is to keep us honest. Make sure, because it is possible for you to send comments, to send questions, to push us if you don't think we're answering the tough questions. Send it to us, because that's the only way you're going to get maximum value from these webinars. So I urge you, take that responsibility on. Send us questions, as many as you like. It's not the White House where you've got one or two questions. You can send as many as you like, as long as you want to learn from the experts that we've gathered for this webinar. That's how you're going to make it work. Now, this panel wouldn't have been possible without the support of RCS. We want to thank the entire team for their loyalty and sustained support. And the jingle that you heard right at the beginning was created by Brandy. I hope you're going to have a fantastic hour with us. It can only be amazing if you participate and cooperate and engage, as you must. But before I say any more, first Global Online Content Series, your moderator now is Gary Krantz.
Thank you, Omar. And thank you, Marguerite Clark and Philip Chapeau of RedTech for inviting me to moderate this panel. As Omar said, we have gathered some of the greatest minds in international media, audio/radio, and they're going to share their observation, thoughts, and comments that I think are topics and issues that face us all today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So Sharon Dastur.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here and, always talk about my favorite subjects. I've spent my career in music and radio for the last 20 plus years. I ran Z100 in New York City for 21 years, worked at iHeartRadio on the national team, so working with all the brands all over the US. And I also spent some time at Universal Music Group with Republic Records, so taking a lot of the knowledge from radio and the stuff of building artists to the label side, which was really fantastic. And then just a couple of years ago, started my own company to work not only with radio intelligence that works with strategic studies around the globe, but also global in the UK. I'm one of their senior advisors. But then also my passion is, really building artists to break that next artist. So I'm working with a handful of artists to help with their strategy and their music and their production, and hopefully break the next big superstar. So I have my toe in a lot of different things and some tech companies as well that are music driven, but just always speaking about my passion is music and radio, and just really excited to be with everyone.
And I want to just add on to Sharon. She's only one of 5 people who have programmed the great Z100 in New York City, and the only female. So I think that's worth noting. Jim, why don't you go?
Yeah, my name is Jim Receveur. I'm the CEO right now of both Denmark and Norway for Bauer Media. I've been also in the business for probably 30 years now. And in principle, I've been in all areas. I started in programming, worked in sales, worked all through the different areas of radio. And for the last 15 years, I've been the CEO for many different international companies around the globe, actually. And at one point, I actually owned my own radio station for 4 years as well. So I'm entrepreneurial. So content is something that's very, very close to my heart. It's something that is, I think, the start point of a lot of radio stations. Without listeners, you can't go anywhere. And it's something that I burn for, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much. And adding a note on that, Jim is Canadian by birth. And so he's very familiar with North American radio as well as obviously the international scope. And he actually ran Clear Channel's radio operations in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. So Sharon, we share that with Jeff.
We're all connected.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then finally, last but not least, Jeff Sattolano. Why don't you go?
Sure. Thanks, Gary. I'll just echo Sharon's thoughts. It's a privilege to be here and talking to you all. My name is Jeff Sattolano. I'm the Executive Vice President and Head of Programming for Odyssey. I got a couple decades in the business as well. I'm coming up on 25 years. Uniquely, have worked my whole career with Odyssey and its predecessors. So worked for CBS Radio, Infinity, Viacom, worked in a variety of local market roles. Had a time when I was on air and quickly realized that my destiny was behind the scenes and not in front of the microphone. But have worked in music formats, sports talk, and then have spent the last decade plus in a sort of central national programming role here at Odyssey. Of course, Odyssey is the second largest U.S. radio broadcaster. We're also the second largest podcast distributor. And so increasingly excited to talk about all things radio, but all things digital audio as well. As I think, obviously, our worlds are merging faster and faster every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And, one of the things that it's important to note about Jeff's current role is that he oversees some of the biggest brands, arguably, in radio, KROQ in Los Angeles, WCBS FM in New York, as well as leading news talk stations like 1010 Wins in New York and KNX in Los Angeles. It's a really, interesting perspective that he brings to us. So with that, I think we'll just jump right in, and I'll start with Jeff. Jeff, many of the formats that we know in the United States, and Jim and certainly Sharon can speak to internationally, were really developed decades ago in the last century, in the 50s. With the myriad of options and on-demand choices that our listeners have, what kind of, do you feel they're relevant still? And what are you doing vis-a-vis your stations to acknowledge that competition is coming from many places now?
Yeah, look, I think, Gary, the data would certainly indicate that we're still relevant, right? In terms of our audience engagement, our consumption, both across traditional linear distribution on AM, FM radio, but obviously increasingly as it relates to both digital live streaming and on-demand, podcast audio, et cetera. So I think the relevancy question, I sort of point to the data and say, we know we're still relevant. I think, what's changed probably, particularly from a music consumption perspective, and definitely interested in hearing, Sharon's perspective in particular, is that, radio's place in, I think the music ecosystem has shifted. And I think, we hear that when we talk to our label and artist partners. We know it when we talk to our audience. It used to be that the only way to get exposed to new music was on your local radio station in a world where, the world's music library was not available at your fingertips on demand, at any second for the low price of $9.99, $12.99 a month, et cetera. And so I think what I believe, and I think what we hear when we talk to our artist partners, is that in the music space, our relevance is still crucial, but it's shifted in that ecosystem. Our expectation from a consumer perspective is maybe less, play me a song that I've never heard before, and more, help an artist go from sort of bubbling under to, playing arenas. We have more data available to us to inform decisions that we make. We use gut and intuition and heart and all of the things that so many of our, music curators have loved about working in the business, but we have so much more data available to us now about how audiences are already reacting to music that might be available on other platforms. And I think the other thing I'd say, again, sort of focusing just on music for a minute, is at Odyssey, at least, and many of our peers, we're leveraging other platforms, maybe outside of traditional AM, FM radio, to be more adventurous and more focused on new music discovery and new artist exposure. We have exclusive stations on our platform that, exclusively play, new music and not library material. And that gives us an opportunity to cater to consumers, excuse me, who have appetite and demand for, aggressively leaning into new music in a way that maybe doesn't make sense for most of our traditional, FM music audience.
Quick follow-up, Jeff, before we jump to Sharon and Jeff. Where are the places you're getting your data from? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think, we still use some of the traditional sources for audience, reaction to the music that we play. I think, like many other broadcast companies, we're still engaged in, some form of call out research and library testing so that we're able to sort of poll our audience either in a local market or regionally or nationally for their appetite on music. We also, are looking at streaming information. Now, we know that streaming information can be, I don't want to say manipulated, maybe that's too strong a word, but it can be influenced, right? And we know through, playlisting tactics and or, maybe sync exposure and or, look what's happening right now with UMG and TikTok. If we were going to look at a local DMA, that's a market-based streaming report, we'd sort of see that maybe UMG's artists are probably suppressed here in the US from a streaming consumption perspective. So we have to take into account that that's probably a result of, the ongoing issue with their material not being licensed by TikTok currently. Please, Sharon.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, streaming numbers are a good indicator. It's good to kind of look at that data, whether it's in the US or globally. But we also know that looking at these numbers don't necessarily represent, your brand's specific audience. So again, it's a good indicator, but it could be people that are outside the demographic that you're targeting, or it could be, you just don't know. So, a lot of people are looking at those numbers, and it doesn't necessarily always help guide a particular station in the right direction, just because it may not necessarily be your audience.
Thank you, Sharon. Jim, what is your observation? Relevant formats competing with every other audio option for your listeners?
Relevance is obviously the biggest word and the most important words all the time in radio anyways, or in audio totally. I think the biggest challenge right now is what the content proposition is going to be in the future, where it's more important now to get the balance right between the music-driven content and the speech-driven content, because I think we're going into an area here where there has been radio stations in the past that were either a talk radio or a music radio, but we're getting something that's mixturing everything up right now. What's on demand? What's web? What's catch up? So we're getting into a huge area here where I think it's important that we find out where's the music and where's the speech? What is selling the music and what is not selling the music? If we're coming into selling new music right now, I think there's a huge demand to sell new music. But we've also gone out and made a radio station where it's only brand new music. And it's wonderful image-wise, and it's wonderful to get a few people to listen. But of course, after maybe 2 months, the artists say, well, yeah, but we want to be on the main station. We're not still getting enough. So it's a question, how do we sell that music? How do we get more out of that music and our content? And this is where we're mixing both the speech driven and the music driven, and you have to get that right.
And Gary, the definition of formats, like with anything, with every industry, it's constantly evolving, and we have to move with how people are viewing it. So, for radio, you've got to have that brand expectation. What are people coming to you for? If they're coming to you for a particular style of music, or the radio personalities, or the content, that has to be clear. So just kind of being a broad saying, okay, you can't really identify the format, I don't think that's going to help win, because you've got to have that brand expectation. When people are coming to your station, are they coming to you for hit music, which could be broader nowadays? Is it coming to you for the incredible morning show, or whatever it is? But I think, formats, yes, in its old terms from the 50s, and it's really niche, I think is long gone. But to make sure that the brand expectation of what people should be expected of your brand should be very clear as a format.
Right. Jim, just to follow up on what you said, obviously radio is very different in the territories and countries, primarily in terms of delivery. It's not over FM. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that helps with seeing that data?
Very much so. I mean, in actually, which most people probably not know, and in Norway is the only country in the world that actually has shut off FM. So Norway's only got DAB and IP listening right now, and of course that was challenging off the start. Today we actually are probably one of the most stable listeners group in all of Europe. So it turned out, but there's a big difference where before we used to maybe have 5 countrywide stations. Now we've got 35 countrywide stations. So the DAB gave us an opportunity, but it also gave us the off chance, because both in Denmark and Norway we use PPM, the people meter, so we can actually see from minute to minute. We can actually even track a song if we would like to find out how a song is going to be performing. I do say we use it with a grain of salt as well, because obviously PPM can swing a lot. It depends on how many encoders you have out there and which areas. So you can use it, though, to look at the data and combine it maybe with your traditional call-out research or your library research. So it gives it one more opportunity anyways to look at the data.
I'm glad you brought up PPM. And this is for Jeff, because he had brought this up in a previous conversation. Is programming by the ratings hour by hour still significant in listening? And now that we have all this direct to listener data available to us, how do you manage that? Because we know that Nielsen is the coin of the realm for the ratings and the advertising support. So how are you managing that process?
Yeah, look, I think we sort of have to, it's a both and situation to me. Like, I think we have to sort of walk and chew gum at the same time. To your point, Nielsen's the referee, they make the rules. And so obviously we all, I think, as broadcasters have incentives to optimize our brand's performance according to the rules that the referee, creates. And so, Nielsen is measuring in the States and in many other countries through the AQH currency still. And so that means, as broadcasters, we're trying to get 5 minutes out of every 15 minutes. And those 15 minutes start at 00 and 15 and 30 and 45. And it's the reason why, at least in the States, if you're listening to broadcast radio and you unfortunately happen to be in the car, at say 13 after, most everybody's in commercials, because, they're trying to optimize their ability to receive credit as Nielsen, awards it. I think as more of our consumption shifts to digital and on demand, at least at Odyssey, we're thinking about how we can cater to listeners and sort of unbreak the shackles of the Nielsen AQH, crediting methodology. We're thinking about things like, do 2 big long stop sets that make sense, again, for AM FM measurement, makes sense from a streaming perspective? Probably not. And so how could we potentially modify our product based on the platform, maybe deliver more frequent, shorter breaks on different platforms that are more in tune with how consumers are listening to other ad-supported audio. If a consumer is listening to ad-supported Spotify, or listening to music or watching it on YouTube, they're used to more frequent, shorter interruptions. And so that's something we're sort of experimenting with. I think even in the digital space, we're thinking about, we know based on our own data, to Jim's point, the data that we can capture from how our listeners are consuming audio on digital platforms is so much more rich than, how they're consuming it on linear broadcast. We know that consumers who listen to brands on our mobile app typically have much shorter session lengths than, say, those that are listening on smart speakers or on desktop. And so we're thinking about how could we disrupt the commercial ad break model to better serve audiences based on how they're listening, what device they're listening on, how long they're listening for, all in an effort to make their relationship with us sort of stickier. The name of the game hasn't changed, whether it's digital, whether it's broadcast, whether it's Nielsen, whether it's server log reporting. We want people to listen more often and for more occasions. And so I think we've got to think about judiciously, how can we do both? That's where I sort of started. We still very much need to win in the Nielsen ratings, but let's be smart about sort of taking chances outside of that analog world to deliver a better experience for consumers.
Sharon,
I was just going to say,
go to you anyway. So why don't you?
No, it's just interesting, and I don't know if a lot of people outside of people that deal with Nielsen and PPM realize, when Jeff talks about those quarter hours and the 5 minutes, again, we have to play the Nielsen game, and it's a crazy game. It's 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be continuous in the same. It has to be 5 minutes non-contiguous in that quarter hour. And if it's 5 minutes that crosses over a quarter hour, it doesn't count. And so trying to program to that, plus then the digital audience, the way people are consuming differently, it's just really interesting that it's still such an antiquated way of viewing the way people listen to radio, and it gets tougher. And like in the UK, RAJAR is the methodology there, and it's still ringing the doorbell and asking them to participate in this survey. And they always joke that when they come to pick up the diary, they ask you in for tea, and while they're in the kitchen, they're quickly filling it out for the week and then handing it back, like the diary method that some people still have, but in the States is slowly weeding out. But it's unfortunate that the methodologies are not so clear cut and not really the way people consume.
Right, Jeff, I know you're very involved with Nielsen and the methodology side of the business. Is Nielsen hurting us in what they're doing? And then Jim can speak a little bit to how audience is measured in his world.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to pick on Nielsen, right? Like it's a favorite pastime, at least here in North America. I mean, I sort of flip that question. I think the ad agencies are probably hurting us because Nielsen's serving the ad agencies and their models and the way they're used to buying legacy media. And so there's not a lot of incentive for Nielsen to say, hey, you've got, generations of buyers and planners that are used to buying rating points and AQH persons. They're serving two constituencies, Nielsen, us as broadcasters and them as advertisers. I mean, I could make the same argument about ad agencies in the US, at least, sort of discounting anyone who's 55 or older. Essentially, we get, no credit from a monetization perspective. Typically, there's very few, buys that are outside of the 25-54 demographic. And I think we all sort of know there's folks are making lots of, significant decisions about their finances beyond that age, but the agencies have just conditioned everyone to say, no, we're really focused on younger demos and sort of 54 at the top end of that. I think what I'd say is the good thing that's happening, at least here in the States, is that, whereas Nielsen used to be the only currency again, as more of that consumption is shifting to other platforms, as we have more opportunities to tell our own story as it relates to how consumers are consuming content and advertising on other platforms, they're becoming less important, I guess, for lack of a better description. They're driving less of our revenue outcomes, and that's enabling us to think differently about how we distribute content and how we monetize it.
And are things like what Xperia is doing with GTS AutoStage and the data that they're providing helpful from I believe it's helpful from a programming point of view, but is that having any resonance with the ad agencies, or has your teams shown that to them? Do they react to it?
I think it's pretty early still in the States from an adoption perspective in terms of like critical mass as it relates to the DTS AutoStage. I think that's true both from a consumer data perspective and from an advertiser data perspective. I think what I would say, I think the biggest value to what DTS and obviously others are doing is bringing the radio experience closer to on equal ground with our pure play competitors, in the sense that, you're going from, again, here in the States, what can sometimes be a really sort of analog experience in the dash, maybe best case scenario, you've got some, artist and title text. Hopefully it's not cut off or scrolling, depending on the display and the character limit, and really making that in-car experience closer to what consumers are experiencing when they're using their Bluetooth connection or their plug to get into CarPlay or Android Auto. To me, that's as a content producer and distributor, that's the biggest benefit is making radio look and feel like a modern technology, and not sort of relegating it to, oh, that's something I go to over here that doesn't have as many features as I'm used to getting in these other audio experiences in the dash.
Jim, hearing from Sharon and Jeff about Nielsen and PPM, what are the realities in Norway and Denmark, and how are you addressing that?
I think one thing is that I can see when I've looked in different countries that actually Nielsen doesn't have a one shoe fits all. Actually, on the PPM side in Scandinavia, we use 15 minutes instead of 5 minutes. But it took a lot of discussion on getting them to use that instead of 15 minutes to aggregate it over that period of time. We've also got a lot of discussions right now regarding headphone listening. How much extra headphone listening is getting picked up, or is it not getting picked up? And the third thing, of course, we're looking at the whole IP. How can we turn around and add the IP on traditional PPM listening? Because we very much can see that our IP listening, when we're looking at our own figures, through also, of course, with podcasts that do have a younger audience, how can we show them and prove to them that we've got that extra reach? So I think Nielsen is actually in a challenge right now where they're not sure really on how to enter the new market here, and it's up to us to turn around and put pressure on them. I agree with you that the agencies are the ones that are should I say writing the recipe, but they've got to be told as well. We're working heavily with the agencies. In fact, we've got some studies going on right now with the Group M and an OMG to find out precisely how do we add on the IP listening on top of the traditional PPM listening, so that it's credible enough that the agencies will buy it. And then, of course, then you've got the second, which you touched upon also earlier, Jeff, is that what about the price? The price for a CPM on digital is somewhat, if you have enough data, is quite higher than it would be on a traditional FM or DAB. Strange enough, again, if I look at Denmark and Norway, we've got the opposite. Because we have PPM and we sell target groups, I can tell you how many people that are between 12 and 25 that listen to me today that are men from this area. I can't do that yet with the digital, but that is something we're working because we don't have enough data yet. So the more data it'll catch up to it. But it's something that is something that I think Nielsen has to be more educated per market, and also maybe look across market to say what is working in one area so that they could be better. I challenge also Nielsen on to be better.
Thanks, Jim. And save the concept that the known measurement groups, Nielsen, Radar, et cetera, it's going to take a minute before they they figure out what they're doing as it relates to us. What other technology and tools are you using, in your programmers using in making decisions on music, on spoken word, on everything that you're presenting on your radio stations?
Who's that to?
Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry.
For Jim, was that?
That was for Jim.
No, okay. I think we've covered it mainly. We're not using any more research. We do where we look at the songs that are being played on our radio stations and on other radio stations, and we look for burnout, and especially on music. But we are also looking then on spoken area, a lot on podcasts, very much on moods. Which podcasts are moving? Is it comedy? Is it news? Is it sports? So we do look at. That's where I started by saying what's music driven and what's speech driven. And I think when we look at both music driven and speech driven, we look at the data differently as well. So on the speech driven, we very much look to see, is sports more interested than health? So we're doing a very much on the downloads, on who's listening on the podcast, on the speech driven, and on the music driven, we're looking more on the PPM and also looking at the call out research and our library music.
Right, because speech isn't very friendly to PPM.
Well, it's not friendly to PPM, but it's also not very. I mean, at least in we have some big public service speech radio stations, but we don't really have any big commercial speech-driven radio stations in Scandinavia now.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to do a little word association right now, because we've all seen these two words, these two letters, everywhere, every place we go. Artificial intelligence and AI. Jeff and I just had the opportunity to be in Nashville at the Country Radio Seminar last week. There were AI panels all day long. It was discussed from the stage. Sharon, why don't we start with you? How is AI, how it's going to impact and how it is impacting content makers and programmers? What practical applications can you suggest for music and talk radio?
With any new technology or anything that people are faced with, obviously people are fearful at first, and then when they start to understand it better, then they figure out ways to incorporate it. I mean, kind of going back to when the internet first started or when Uber first started, all these different things, whether it's social media, people viewed it one way, they all evolved into something that now is part of our everyday life. And AI, it's funny how you said these two letters, that probably a year ago, yes, there were things going on that has been using AI technology, but now it's the conversation for every industry and how they can apply it to benefit their consumer or their product. And I've been consulting a company called Futuri that uses a lot of incredible AI technology that benefits how a radio station can put together content for what they're talking about on the air, like really seeing in real time what people are talking about on social media and seeing that is this conversation continuing to be on the rise, or is it kind of past its time, so maybe they shouldn't be talking about it anymore because people have moved on. I mean, even using, I know it's kind of frightening for a lot of people, but I think a great case study of cloning personality voices is, think about a personality that's maybe on, several radio stations, 20, 30, 80, 100 in the States, or, in smaller European countries if they're broadcast nationally. How can that personality really engage with a local audience, talking about local events, talking about local news, talking about things that matter to that local audience? They can't. But I've seen some case studies and some examples of cloning their voice, being able to have them talk about and we'll just talk about in the States. Let's just say it was Ryan Seacrest talking about the Cincinnati State Fair, like hearing a big name personality talking about something that's meaningful. Or, I'm from Texas, and the Texas, rodeo is a huge thing. And to have Ryan Seacrest, who may be on here in Houston, Texas, talking about, all right, tonight, Beyonce's playing the rodeo tonight at the Energy Stadium. Like, he wouldn't be able to do that stuff, because when he's got so many markets, so many things, and to be able to have technology that someone can type that in, his cloned voice matches those things, and to connect the local audience, which, as we know, over the years, we try hard to continue to do that, but it's getting harder and harder to really connect to that local audience because of all the other things that are going on. So I look at, AI technology in that form that could really benefit a consumer and a listener, because they're getting that touchy-feely feel that they wouldn't have gotten from just a general personality break.
Thanks. Jeff, what are you doing with AI currently that you could share? Is there any examples on the air now that we can listen to? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'd start by sort of coloring and contexting in saying, at least the way I look at it, is it's an amazing enablement technology. I think that Futurri, I think, jolted us all about a year ago, Sharon, when they launched their first like fully synthetic voice here in the US. I actually had the opportunity to meet Ashley, the broadcaster at a Portland station, not of ours, of another broadcast groups, last week at CRS. And I think, to Sharon's point about sort of the discomfort and fear, I think that put a lot of sort of broadcasters and talent in particular sort of back on their feet to go, oh my God, wait a minute. Like, here's a broadcaster who's outsourced a whole shift, to a synthetic voice. Look, I think that that possibility exists in the future, that we might see more of that. But the thing that's exciting to me in the near term, to Sharon's point, are all the ways we could use it to maybe give our talent, our programmers, more time back in their day. You look at things like, listener actualities or voices. It's become, really hard in the States to, we don't have as many promotions and marketing teams attending as many events as our business has evolved, and capturing, real listener feedback that we want to use in imaging or content. And even when we had those stabs, I think we all can relate to how hard it is sometimes to get somebody to say something you want them to say, to put in a promo. There are a couple of partners, including ones that we're working with, that are producing really compelling synthetic listener, audio, which is giving us time back. Our creative sound designers and imaging directors. There's a company we're working with that's leveraging AI from a music curation perspective as it relates to building logs. So there's still a human touch, and I think that's also important to say about all these things. Like, AI is only as good as the human touch that goes into it on the way in, and the human touch that comes out of it on the way out. It still requires a really significant level of, folks that have an understanding of our audiences and our brands to be able to sort of massage and optimize this content. And I think crucially, and maybe, Jim can speak to this, but we're also seeing applications in the revenue space, leveraging AI, in real time to build audience targets, to test and develop different versions of creative. I think, these things are all going to be, I think, exciting as it relates to, democratizing AI and making tools available. Because I think, at least as I think about it in our organization, what I think about how it'll be used 5 years from now is silly. And what we'll learn is, by putting this technology in the hands of our content creators, that they'll develop new use cases and sort of show us the way as to how it's, making our content better and giving them more time to focus on things that matter.
Jim, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of AI, but I'm also, should I say, interested in how it'll develop. You're right. There's a lot. It's going all different directions. So it's a question which way do you want to look at it? On a programming side, we're looking at how much personalized radio we want to do. It's getting more and more one-to-one, and as Jeff mentioned just at the end, we also look at the economical side, the financial side of it. I mean, how small of a radio station do we want to make a radio station before it's feasible? I'm a big Billy Joel fan, so should I have just a Billy Joel radio station that only plays Billy Joel and talks about Billy Joel? So it is a question of finding out how narrow you want to go. I think also on we've got some success and what's moving a lot over here in Europe anyways is we're looking at the news side of it. But there's also if you're going to be looking at trying to make a news radio or you have to look at the who has the rights for the news. And this is a big discussion over here. We've been very successful in Poland, and we've also been successful in Finland to do some AI. But in Poland, we're blessed with the best news company in all of Poland. So we have a huge area that we own the rights. We own all the editorial side of it, so we can work with it. Right now, it's the question of is AI going to be a dirty word because people are trying to steal, or is it going to be a good word because we're trying to build? And I think that's the process that we're going through right now. Is we're trying to, how can I say, we're trying to make AI more cool and more honest, but we're also trying to work it to try to challenge it at the same time.
Yeah, there's this great YouTube video that's going viral where someone asked Joel Walsh about is AI going to threaten the music business, and he said, when AI can throw a television set out of a hotel room, or wreck a guitar, then come and talk to me. Jim, someone comes into your market, or Jeff, someone comes into your market, and they've just turned on an AI radio station in 8 seconds, right? They've picked the music and done all that. How do you think that's going to impact a listener? Are people going to, be curious about that? Are they going to know the difference? Are people doing that anyway? Because we certainly see a lot of companies coming into our space saying they could do that, make it up, reduce expenses, which has to resonate with the ones upstairs. Are you feeling pressure to use AI more or less in your seat?
Yeah, I'd like to. It's actually quite funny because we had a discussion the other day. Is that I remember 10 years ago, maybe it's even longer ago, when the first time, as we all knew that tracking came on, where people didn't actually, they recorded their night show or recorded this. And I mean, all the DJs and the people that were interested in, they say this is going to be the biggest nightmare ever. And I think that then it was a question, can you hear if that's a track, or can you not hear about that if that's a track? And then there was sort of be a challenge of how good can you track? And I mean, if I want to fast forward, I mean, tracking is what AI is going to be in the future. It's just going to be more automated. So it's a question, tracking didn't kill the radio station. It's streamlined a lot of area. And I mean, I know that AI is 1,000 times different than tracking. I just want to say though that I'm back to sort of what Jeff had mentioned also. It's still what we put into it. What is it that how do we control it? And how do we work with it? Because it is up to us.
Thank you very much. We have a question from our audience who's been patiently waiting, and we can continue the AI discussion. And I want to get into podcasting a bit too. But Boyd Leader has been patiently waiting. He posted an interesting question going back, Jim, to something earlier said. You mentioned that Norway went to 35 national brands with the move away from terrestrial radio. Has there been any formats that have emerged that surprised you?
Yeah, there has. I mean, one is that Northern Europe is not big country. And all of a sudden, every radio group decided they were going to be doing a country station. But it was even, I'd like to share that we even did something that I think was even more fun, is we actually made a podcast radio where we actually took the podcast and we just said, okay, now we know that we're going to turn it around because podcast is usually on demand, but we'll make a podcast radio that will just support it and promote it so that all our podcasts that we have right now, you can hear them online on normal DAB. And the third thing which we did, which was actually quite funny, is we made 100% commercial radio. So all we did was play commercials. All the commercials that run on our radio station, you can hear on this. And then what we did is we put some podcasts in between the commercials to saying how the commercials have been working, what's the success of it. So we did a business-to-business radio station on DAB, promoting commercials, talking with the advertising agencies, showing the success of how radio works, and convince them to listen. We didn't sell so much advertising on it, but it was a great brand.
Sharon and Jeff, take note. That's a good idea. Jeff, do you want to speak to, Odyssey also has a very robust and very dominant podcast division. You run the radio side. I know you interact with the podcast and the digital team all the time. How's that journey going both ways, radio to podcast and podcast to radio?
Can I, if I might, Gary, I want to just go back and pull on the AI string a little bit more, just building off of what Jim said, and then I'll follow up with the podcast question. I think Jim sort of hit on something that I think is really important, which is that, again, if we look at AI as this new technology that again, we might have some fear or anxiety around, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice as an industry. And I think we need to be really careful about not applying sort of different rules to it that we apply to other technological tools that we use already. Gary, you heard I shared an anecdote last week at the Country Radio Seminar. One of the audience members asked, do we have an obligation to tell our audience, when we're using, a synthetic voice? And I sort of turned that back around and said, and again, I can't speak for international markets, but here in the States, many stations use voice actors. Many of the biggest benchmarks in, morning radio are made to sound as if they're relationship drama between two listeners, but in reality, it was recorded in advance with actors, in a production room. And so there's sort of the question is like, do we feel an obligation before that benchmark every morning at 8:20 to broadcast to our audience? This is fake. Don't have too much fun listening to it. No, we don't. We want to obviously be within FCC policy here in the States, legal boundaries, et cetera. But I think we should all be really careful about not applying standards to AI that we don't apply to other parts of our business. Because the other point I'd make is that the folks who are not going to have any boundaries as it relates to their use of AI are our real competitors. Sharon and iHeart used to be, I think, Odyssey's, biggest competitor, but I think iHeart today would say, and Odyssey today would say, our biggest competitors are Google and Spotify and Amazon. And so whatever rules we put in place, I guarantee you, they're going to have, less concern for the audience or brand, and they're going to be more aggressive with their deployment. And we should just keep that in mind.
Thank you.
I think on the podcast front, Gary, I do actually oversee one of our podcast studios. So we have a sports podcast studio at Odyssey, in addition to obviously, podcast in other formats. And look, I think Odyssey's road has probably not been unlike some of our peers. The podcast market, grew rapidly in the US. I think, technology enabled that, and the pandemic enabled that. There was huge consumer adoption and huge advertiser adoption. And so companies like ours, made acquisitions to get into this space quickly. And I think we've spent the last few years sort of better integrating, these standalone separate podcast studios with our quote unquote, radio operation, so that, we're able to lean into expertise and best practices from folks that are natives in that space. And we can bring them as support for our radio talent that are interested in creating, new original podcast content, and vice versa. We have a lot of podcast talent, and candidly, it's, I think, one of the reasons you've seen broadcast companies in the US make these acquisitions and strategic evolutions. It's really compelling to say to a podcast talent, we reach 180 million consumers in the US, who listen to our audio every day, and we've got opportunities to integrate you into our broadcast, whether that's replaying the podcast on some of our news talk brands, versioning, segments of the podcast into our morning shows, or just obviously how we can leverage our sort of bully pulpit to promote and encourage adoption of new shows that we're launching. So increasingly, it's really sort of one content team as opposed to a radio programming team and a podcast team. Those lines are definitely blurring at Odyssey.
Right. I want to jump to Sharon for a minute because she's involved at the point of creation on the music side in many very successful artists' careers. What are you seeing now? Are artists walking into a studio thinking about, well, can I use AI to make this a radio hit versus another? I mean, are they thinking about it? And not just the music people, but to the rest of the panel when we're talking about news reporters or spoken word. But primarily, since music is such a big part of what we're all doing. Sharon, can you speak to that a little bit? If you're seeing a little
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting just seeing how it's evolved over time, and I'm very fortunate that I'm working on both sides of it, of helping program stations, but then also, like you mentioned, I've helped break through my career some of the biggest artists. But nowadays, when for example, last week I was up at all the major labels last week, which was a tough week in the U.S. because there were a lot of layoffs and a lot of merging of labels. But it's interesting to see and hear their honest perspective of radio and the impact on the music and what they're doing with their artists. And I've had many of them last week talk about the fact that, okay, what is their return on their investment of doing a TV performance? They feel like they're not getting any kind of. It used to be that they'd see an increase in album sales. Now they're sometimes seeing negative impact from TV performances. Same with radio events or radio partnerships. They don't see the value that they once did, which I hate hearing because I know the value of radio is so strong for artists and just how we position that. But to your point of the way artists look at it, right now, these are all case studies of the last couple of years of, you can't really say that there's a timeline for a song anymore. We've seen whether it's, the Murder on the Dance Floor that is 20 years old is now on every radio station, or the Kate Bush song from the Netflix show, or a Rihanna song that was huge on TikTok but was 18 years old, but a lot of people started playing it. It's kind of an open field for artists, and they're not really clear on how to navigate it anymore. They're not making a lot of money off of streaming. Radio is important. They still want that look on radio. They love those Times Square billboards with, that they made Spotify New Music Friday or whatever it is. So, going into the studio, there are a couple of artists that I've heard just say, even with their music being taken off of TikTok, they're focusing on sync. Like, that's where people are seeing success, is that they're fortunate enough to get sync in a TV placement, commercial. I was talking to a producer the other day, and he was saying, that he got a big global campaign for the Olympics with Coca-Cola. And so he's working on all this music. And so, similarly to the way we're evolving and how we have to think about what we're doing as a business, artists are doing the same. It's, the way people are consuming their product is so different. And, there were so many examples of artists that had really great growth from streaming in direct correlation to content on TikTok. When that music got taken down, you all of a sudden saw a sudden drop on their streaming numbers, which was interesting to see that it's just really so tied together on some songs and some artists. So it's challenging for artists as well at the moment.
Thanks. We have about 6 minutes left, and we have a question from the one of our viewers, listeners that we want to get in here. Mark Gilman asked, what are, we have a huge responsibility as broadcasters. This AI talk and podcast talk and all that is fine, but what are we doing to create programming that really enhances the lives of audiences and delivers on, he says, redemption, but I think I know where he's going there. What are we doing to serve the public, and how are we using all these technologies to do it better? Can we speak to that?
Yeah, so I have one specific answer I'm really proud of at Odyssey, Mark, which is our I'm Listening program. So, mental health and, suicide prevention, obviously is a big topic in the States. I think it's fair to say that most experts would say, we're dealing with a mental health crisis here in the States. Again, can't speak to all of our international markets, but born out of the suicide of the untimely passing of Chris Cornell, who was the lead singer of Soundgarden, really influential alternative band here in the States. One of our alternative stations in Seattle, The End, which had been sort of crucial to the exposure of grunge, in the early 90s, developed a program called I'm Listening that was really about empowering our talent to have frank conversation with our audience about mental health. And over the course of the last, 9 years, I think this year will be our 10th, we've grown and grown and grown this program to the point where, I'm Listening is Odyssey's biggest, community commitment. It culminates in a roadblock 2-hour live broadcast across every single one of our stations. News, sports, music was somewhat unprecedented when we started it. We have a partnership with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And in those 2 hours, we say, hey, we play Taylor Swift, and we talk about the New York Giants of the NFL, and we're going to stop doing all that right now, and we're going to have a conversation about mental health and the resources that are available to you if you're struggling. And we've run that thread not only through that 2-hour special, but through our whole year. It's a part of our community affairs programming every weekend on all of our stations. Every artist, every athlete that we have the opportunity to interview, we ask them questions about, how they, take care of their mental health, whether or not they've been, affected. And so it's a huge honor, and I think a huge responsibility that really the entire organization, takes seriously. And obviously, again, over the course of the last 4 years in the pandemic, we saw obviously the importance of that topic, increase as people were dealing with isolation, loss of income, untimely passing of family members, et cetera. It is part of the mission, I think, at Odyssey. Candidly, everybody in our organization, whether they sit in content and programming or sales or digital, they play a role in I'm Listening and our commitment to it year round.
That's
and
fantastic.
Similarly, in the UK, we're doing a program, Make Some Noise, that has been built over years, and it's such a great campaign of similar topics, supporting physical and mental health, preventing isolation, and working with a lot of charities throughout the year to make sure we're reaching the audience and helping in all forms and fashions.
That's great. Obviously, this could be, Jim, you want to speak to that? And I'm going to move to our last.
I think any radio station that has, credibility will do this, and it will follow it up. Bauer also is extremely important, and we hold it close to our heart of how we can help people. I just flash one is when, again, in Poland, when the war broke out in the Ukraine, Poland made a whole radio station right on the border for the Ukraine, in the Ukrainian, so that they could talk to to the people to welcome them into the Poland on how they can help them, how can they work together. I think that this is one of the things radio can do, and we have the possibility to do. And I think we also have the duty to do that as a broadcaster, to say, how can we help them? When we have such a huge audience, I think we also have a job to make sure that we take care of them.
That's great. We can obviously go on for hours just on that topic, but we want to get to, one of the promises of this webinar to address. Jeff had mentioned that at 55, it drops down. If you're 55, all of a sudden you don't listen to the radio, you don't buy products, it doesn't matter anymore. How can we realistically get Gen Z and the younger listeners back to radio at scale? Can we make radio? I would argue that radio is sexy, but how can we make it more sexy? And are there some practical ideas? One practical idea for each of you that you can share with our audience. Let's go to Jeff first.
Yeah, look, I think, Gary, I guess just one tactic that we think about, and I think maybe a shift and evolution in our thinking is, because we are the number one reach medium, because we talk about, the bully pulpit that we have and the incredible opportunity we have, across AM, FM distribution to reach so many consumers. Speaking only for Odyssey, I think, at times we've been guilty of not being as focused on audience acquisition and audience development as maybe we should have. So I think, video is a huge opportunity. We think, obviously we're seeing increasingly more and more, talent and brands produce compelling, video content. Candidly, it's actually an area of AI that is also exciting to me. Like today, it's very sort of difficult and expensive to produce, video content. And I think AI is going to enable it to become much more efficient and lower cost of entry. And so we spend a lot more time thinking about, how do we reach the people that don't know about 1010 Wins in New York? We've sort of taken it for granted all these years. Like 1010 Wins is one of, the most recognized brands in AM FM radio in New York. And so we've got to, I think, be more thoughtful about how do we create more content in the fashion in which consumers are already consuming it. Like we said, how do we create a local podcast connected to the 1010 Wins brand that maybe serves as an entry point for that consumer, because maybe the linear, AM FM broadcast is not going to be the entry point. How do we reach them on the platform?
I think I saw a study at the NAB earlier last week that talked about the number one place for music discovery is TikTok. The number one place for news is TikTok. How do we compete with that, or how do we leverage that? Sharon, do you want to talk a little bit about Gen Z?
Yeah.
Anything about that?
No, absolutely. And you hit it on the head right there. Like, for example, with Global in the UK, they have one of the largest radio TikTok accounts in the world because of the kind of content that they're creating, whether it's original content, artist content, personalities, talking about the clips from podcasts, and that's drawing in an audience that's not necessarily tuning into the radio station initially. They're seeing things that are compelling to them because it's on TikTok, and they're like, okay, what is this conversation? Who is this personality? Oh, it's Roman Kemp, who hosts the breakfast show on Capitol. Oh, wow, he's on a radio show. I might check that out. And we're seeing, making sure we're taking those brand extensions, and this applies for everybody, whether it's a brand extension of a podcast, brand extension of social media. Again, we know everyone, all of us, we're on our phones constantly, especially that generation. And if they're scrolling for a long time on TikTok and they find some content that's compelling and interesting, they're going to, look at other pieces of content or say, okay, oh, wow, this, me personally, I've found so many podcasts just from clips that I've seen on TikTok or Instagram, because I'm like, oh, I didn't realize this person had a podcast, or, oh, wow, they're saying some interesting things, wasn't aware of them. And then I dive in deeper into where their content is for the full episode. And so I think really maximizing social media and podcasting as brand extensions to the brand are gonna, I mean, there's no secret pill. Everyone has always asked for the last several years, how do we get them back? How do we get them back? It's tough. It's really tough. But knowing the behavior of what a lot of that generation's doing on their phone and how they're consuming things in general can help that.
Thanks, Jim. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah,
How do
I
we
think.
keep them?
Yeah, I mean, it's different because we have to go out and get them. They're not coming to us like other people have done for years and years and years. We have to reach into TikTok's heart and pull them out. We have to be basically on all the platforms they are, and we have to bring them back. I see TikTok as well as people are flying by things like 100 miles an hour, and they're not really getting. They get a lot of people coming by them, but they're not getting any loyalty. We can also see, at least in Scandinavian here, their price-wise is they get the lowest CPM than any other media because people are not staying with them. So it is a question: are we using TikTok as a marketing tool to bring them back? As Sharon just said, that maybe that she's introduced some podcasts, and if we own the podcasts, then of course we can bring them back. So I think that we have to be where they are, but we also have to, in principle, market and tell them what they should come back to us for.
Thank you very much. Well, we are right about 6 minutes past the hour. This has been a great discussion. We could obviously keep going, but we don't want to waste everybody's time. But Omar will be telling you about upcoming episodes for this series. So I thank you all for joining us for the past hour or so. And I now turn it over to Omar.
Gary, thanks for the humility there. I don't think any of you have wasted anybody's time today. Judging by the reactions we've had, people have found this very, very enlightening. And that's 100% because of your contribution today. It's been very well received by everyone. So thank you for making the time. We appreciate it very much. Gary, Jeff, Sharon, Jim, this was incredible. You gave of your wisdom and you gave freely and you didn't hold back, which is what we appreciate. Panel was made possible by our sponsor, RCS. We thank them for their support. Now, remember, this is just episode 1 of the Global Content Online series. We're going to do at least 5 more this year, Gary. That's what we're hoping to do. We're still working on the topics, working with programmers and content makers around the world to try and understand what else they want to know more about. But they have told us what they want in episode 2. And that's where we're going to start talking about audience engagement and growth. And here the focus is on the tips and the tricks that will help you grow your audience, increase your TSL through smart, battle-tested programming and content ideas. This is happening on April 3rd. It's 10 o'clock Eastern, 4 p.m. Central European time. As you can see, it's Carolyn Gilbert, Ross Winters, Phil Dowse, and Tapas Sen. They're people from all over the world. Our experts are from everywhere. They've got some really, really good insights to share with you. So make a date, and we'll see you all on April 3rd.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.